All right, welcome to the steering committee for February 7th. We will, everybody coming in will catch up. So again, please sign it to the appropriate list there, your name, affiliation, and organization. Here is our agenda for today. So we're going to do a roll call in just a moment. We'll have a welcome from the co-leads. We'll have a follow-up from previous meetings from West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. And then we've got an incredible presentation on the Prescott Greening initiative that will be done by Hyphae Designs. And then we're going to, that'll be the majority of the meeting tonight. We'll have a couple of opportunities for you all to weigh in through polls and discussions. We're going to have a breakout, and then as usual, we're going to do a meeting evaluation. All right. I do not see Miss Margaret and Ryan on the call right now.
Yeah, they're just wrapping up at the Port Symposium, so I assume they'll probably join soon.
Okay, gotcha. So we've got a pretty packed schedule, and so we're gonna kind of keep it moving. They know all this stuff. So we're gonna start with Jess.
Hi all. Normally you.
Before
Sorry,
we,
do you want me to just jump in?
before we do that, as we have been doing in recent meetings, just going over the protocol. You know, no questions, comments during the presentations, but please do add questions as they come up, and you can add them to the chat. We're going to, in order, hear from our steering committee members first, then the general public, and then the co-leads. That's just our protocol. And before we do that, we're actually going to do the I'm going to do the roll call. So if you could bear with me. So is Bill Abudi here? I did not see Bill. Laura Areola. Is Brent here yet? Reverend Carroll. Bridget Cook. Kevin Cruson. Richard Grove.
Here. Yeah, I'm here. This is Kevin.
I thought I saw you, Kevin. Welcome. I saw
Thank you.
Haynes, Matt Heft.
Hello, I'm here.
Sony Johnson. I think I saw Tamara White. It's Alverdia.
I'm here.
Colin, Selena, or Kathy.
Kathy is present.
Great. Let me make a notation of that. Fern. Fern is not here. David Woolley. Robert.
Alila just said in the chat that she's here.
Yes, got her. Robert Phillips. Layla Sadat.
Good evening. I'm here.
Okay, and Adriana. Or Tram.
Oh, yes. Adriana's not here, but Tram is here.
Okay, great. Thanks. All right. I will be, when a few more people come in, I will add the the sign-in sheets again, because you probably won't be able to access it. So now, Jess, take it away.
Thank you. So I'm covering for Nicole tonight. For those of you who wish you could hear her lovely voice, she has lost it temporarily. So I'm going to try to do her justice. But our first update, we're very excited at the Environmental Indicators Project to welcome 2 new full-time team members. Thorangani Saxena and Clara Weinstein are both with us tonight. And I would love for you two to just maybe pop on camera, say hello, and just maybe share a word or two about what you're focusing on at EIP.
Hey, this is Clara, she, her pronouns. I started a few weeks ago as the communications manager. I'm going to be working mostly on social media and newsletter, really looking forward to getting to know all of you, learning why this work is important to you. And yeah, looking forward to making accessible, clear resources that help us do this work.
Hi everyone, Thorangani here. Really great to be meeting you all virtually. I'm a project manager with WOCAP, focusing on our decarbonization portfolio. Sorry, I'm a little out of breath, just running back from the port to get this started.
Thank you. All right, should we hit the next slide? Thanks. So we have a quick update for those of you who have been following the West Oakland Link project. We wrapped up a whole series of community sessions last year where we collected a lot of feedback and input and worked on designs for this bike and walk path that is coming to West Oakland. We will have another community meeting. Our first of the year will be in the second week of April. We're still finalizing the date. So stay tuned. We will certainly announce it in our newsletter and send out a invitation if you're on our link list already. And if not, feel free to reach out. You can sign up for that on our website. At that point, we'll share out designs to date. They'll be about 1/3 of the way there, and they'll reflect a lot of the community feedback that the project planners and engineers received over the course of those that first round of design sessions that we did. Next slide, please. Excellent. So our last meeting was not so much a meeting, but a celebration. We were really excited to have our first in-person steering committee event since the pandemic. It was a resounding success. We heard some really great responses from folks who attended. We had about 150 or so folks that we are aware of come through the doors, including a lot of folks who had not yet been exposed to the West Oakland Community Action Plan work and process. So that's really exciting. Christina Garcia, who was one of the co-authors of AB 617, shared about her experience on that, working on that process and the work that she's still doing. And of course, we had well over a dozen different organizations and agency partners tabling and sharing information about all of the important work that has come out of the West Oakland Community Action Plan. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our last update is just a heads up. We are going to be doing this semi-annual evaluation survey, which is really our opportunity to understand how the WOCAP process is working in terms of getting information out there and participating in these meetings. So if you've come to a meeting, you don't have to be a steering committee member. You can just be somebody who's been part of the community, who has been interested. If you've showed up to a meeting, we want to hear from you. And so keep an eye on your inbox. The co-leads team is putting this together. So that's coming soon, and that'll also go out via email. And I'm sure we'll mention it at an upcoming meeting as well. All right, I think that's all of our updates. Am I right about that, Randolph?
that is. And
Exciting.
get to the Prescott Greening, we have a couple of other members that join. Welcome, Reverend Carroll, and anyone else who has just joined. Again, I put the sign-in sheets in the chat, and so I saw Brent roll in. Welcome, Brent. Yes, the sign-in sheet is in the chat, so please sign into the appropriate one. I think I got all of the members, whether you put your box or not, but please take a look at that. And we're going to move forward, and we're going to hear from High-Fay Design Labs, May and Brent.
So I'm just going to run through a few slides of quick overview of the project and just give you all some context on the Prescott Greening, and then hand off to May, who's going to walk you through the project itself and get into some of the more exciting elements of this. And just a friendly reminder, if you could keep your mic muted during the presentation, and drop any questions you have in the chat if you'd like to be added to the speaking queue for when the presentation wraps. We'll hold questions until the end. So Randolph, if you want to jump to the next slide, I can just give a quick kind of run through of what we're going to talk about. Thanks. So as I said, I'll do a quick overview and contextualize things, and then hand off to May from High-Fay, who's our partner in this project. And May will walk us through the site we're talking about within Prescott, and really get into the foundations of the modeling work that is driving a lot of the design stuff they've been working on. And that's for us, it's a really exciting piece of this project. And then ultimately, this will lead to a group of designs that we will be sharing with you, and May will walk you through those, and we'll have the opportunity to go through those and talk about what the implications are for the community, get input, feedback, and really dig into the design work. You can hit the next slide, please. Great, thank you. So Prescott Greening is a pilot project. It's the fruition of what really is an ongoing process for us with High-Fay over the last bunch of years. It's sort of taken different forms and iterations as it has gone from idea, just like a mere concept, into where it is now, which is really launching this pilot, this sort of test project. And the goal is to really test the use of computer modeling and this sort of approach to designing spaces using natural buffers, living buffers, so trees and plants, to help reduce emissions exposure. And we're focusing on Prescott specifically because it is a hotspot. WOCAP members, steering committee members, are well aware that Prescott's a high-risk zone within West Oakland, with higher health risks due to the higher concentrations of emissions. So this is a really important project for us because it allows us to prioritize that area. And it's focusing, this particular pilot project is focusing really on frontage road from 7th to 16th Street. May we'll talk more about the location with some of the Caltrans freeway and 7th Street areas. And then there's this underlying component to develop a stewardship model to help us make sure that whatever is installed and planted actually is able to be maintained and sustained over time, hopefully within the community and by the community. Next slide, please. Thanks. So Prescott Greening really speaks to a number of the WOCAP strategies, and each of them sort of has a different approach to greening and emissions reduction and control. But the sort of core strategies that it really tackles is 10, 11, 12, and 16. And you don't need to read all of this and sort of digest it all tonight. You can find this on our website at woep.org, woeip.org/strategies. You can view all of them. But strategy 10 really is a city strategy that focuses on the urban canopy, tree canopy. They've got an urban forest plan currently that is being worked on. And so this sort of directly feeds into that. And strategy 11, which is also another city-led strategy, which is that stewardship component. So training residents to maintain biofilters. Biofilters, of course, here being trees that filter the air. And then strategy 12 is really more of an air district and EIP kind of led focus. And this is really where I think this is a carryover or a sort of the fruition of a earlier green infrastructure project that was underway early in the WOCAP process. So this is sort of the evolution of that. And then finally, strategy 16, which is more of a research focused strategy, which really aims to look at the exposure reduction benefit of these vegetative barriers. Really, does planting trees actually work to reduce exposure? And that's a really important piece of this is for us to understand if how we're directing these resources is being effective and making sure that we're directing them in the right places for the most, for the highest impact that we can have. And I think with that, excuse me, next slide. So yeah, excuse me, as I lose my voice. Sorry. So yeah, this is just to sum up. This is one piece of the puzzle of improving air quality. It's not about pulling one lever and solving air quality issues in West Oakland. This is really a component of our approach across all of these strategies. So we're really excited to dig into this, and best of timing. My next slide is to hand off to May from Hyphy, who is going to get into the nuts and bolts of the project and really walk you through the science behind it, the modeling concepts, and the designs themselves. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I apologize because I actually have a very old computer and I don't have a webcam. But yeah, very happy to be here. So can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. All right, so as Jess was talking about, the Prescott Greening project is basically a demonstration project around green infrastructure. And so the intention is to take what we currently know about how to use green infrastructure in tree plantings to reduce air pollution and use that to design a showcase project and measure how well that works. And so our goal is to model what pollution is like now, model what effects of different greening solutions would be, design and build those solutions, and then monitor the results. And then repeat that in other places, such as other impact zones in the other or other AB 617 cities. So here is our timeline for the project. And this is where you come in. So what we want to be is a technical assistant for the community. So after identifying places that we can do plantings and doing some modeling, our intention is to now present what we've found to the community who lives here. And your job is to tell us how the future of this area should look and what to prioritize in trying to design interventions. Then in February to August, we're going to develop more fleshed out concept designs and model those. And once again, we want to get feedback from the community, likely in September. And based on that, we're going to make any final changes before presenting the master plan. So additionally, concurrently, we're going to be developing this stewardship plan so that we can take care of the things we build. That's not really going to be something I'm going to cover much today, but I did want you to know that that is part of our project. So now that I've introduced you to the general idea of the project, I want to show you some more detail about the project area itself. So here's a map of the neighborhood and some of the project zones we're going to be looking at. The red zone is the Prescott impact area. That's the area we're hoping to have improved the air quality of after our project. The yellow zone is the area along the freeway that's managed by Caltrans. The blue is the frontage road. The teal is plantable area along the frontage road, and purple is the 7th and frontage intersection. And so here's a aerial view of those zones. And then here's another view. And so today we're going to be exploring the immediately plantable and the frontage road portion of these zones. But we want to get community feedback on all of these eventually. So first, there is this zone along frontage road that is immediately plantable, and we're calling it that because we could theoretically plant there tomorrow if we had all the necessary permits and equipment. Some of the zones that we're looking at have trees in them. And these areas, we'd like to fill in or replace trees in order to create a thicker buffer of trees. And we'd ideally also like to rebuild irrigation there. So there's also areas we've identified with almost no trees at all that we could plant. So here you can see the old train station. There's that old train station again. And you can see there's a lot of space there where you could put a lot of trees. There's also areas where we could have the opportunity to fill in both trees or plant vines that hang over the wall. So that's like the area along frontage that's immediately plantable. There's also another zone with a lot of plantable space. That's the area along the 880 freeway, which is managed by Caltrans. That's the California State Department of Transportation, and they basically manage all the highways and freeways. And then the other areas we're interested in redesigning are a little more complex. So in order to plant in these, we would have to do much more significant changes to the road. So one of these is 7th Street. Here's another view of 7th Street. And we want to have a more involved design feedback session about 7th Street in the future. So now for the most important thing to notice is that the 7th Street dips down to a low point under the freeway, and frontage road dips down to meet it. All right, so finally we have frontage road. So this is the area where we think there's a lot of really interesting adaptation opportunities that we want to share. So here's an image which shows the elevation of the area. The dark zone here is where 7th and frontage intersect, and 7th goes under the freeway. And here's that image zoomed way out, and you can see that super dark area there. That's because it's topographically lower than basically all of Oakland. And so the problem with that is the way that the water tends to move through the landscape is that it moves downhill and then collects in the lowest points. And so this area is also totally covered in concrete. So there isn't really anywhere for the water to sink into the ground. And so you've basically created a big bathtub. And when it rains a lot, there can be issues with flooding in this area. Here's a picture of some of that flooding in 2019. And so we'll talk more about some of our solutions to that flooding later on. So after that lower part where it meets 7th Street, frontage rises up to a higher elevation and runs along the freeway. So it's a very large road with a huge, mostly unused middle lane and really, really large shoulders on either side. And it has, here's like a new housing development that you might recognize along frontage. And from this aerial view, you can see that it's the only thing that separates the 880 freeway from the neighborhood. So we have a lot of thoughts about how these areas could be improved, but we first want to give folks the opportunity to think about these places. Have you been there before? What's your experience visiting these places? Do you have any impressions of these places? And so we have like 10 to 15 minutes if folks want to share any thoughts about this area.
Beth, it looks like you've experienced the flooding there.
Yes. I don't, is this a written feedback or spoken feedback?
Randolph, this is the first Zoom poll. Randolph?
You're muted, Randolph.
Sorry. Frontage road experience?
Yes.
Is that what's up?
We're not seeing it, but yes, that's the one. Oh, great. I may not see it as a co-host.
Should be live right now. Is anybody saying the?
Yes, it's there.
We see it.
Yeah, it's there. Rolling. Got 10, 11.
Hi, Randolph. This is Tamara. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Are we in meeting, like little meeting rooms, or
There should. I'm not sure if you came in right after the poll was launched, but there's a poll currently.
Oh, I see. Okay, let me see. Thanks.
If you would like to share your thoughts, the question is, what does frontage road mean to you? If you know these areas, what is your experience of them? How do you use the areas, and what are your concerns about the areas? So if you want to put that in the chat, you can do that as well.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Okay, Randolph, my question was, are you putting the questions up one at a time and then we answer one at a time?
No, you can answer any of those questions. What's your experience? So you obviously know frontage road. So you can tell us, you know, what's your experience? How do you use them? And what are your concerns?
Okay, well, I answered number one pretty much says what the experience is, because I'm really not down that way, you know, so, but,
do you have any concerns?
Well, none at this time.
Okay, that's fine. We will register a at this time.
Well, I'm not sure if it was at the last steering committee meeting where I was speaking on
Sideshow.
where they have the elevation going like up the port and stuff, and it's not really suited for disabled persons. and that's really not addressed. I believe that was in the last steering committee.
Great. We've got
And then, yeah, I wanted to just put one in too.
no safe passage for pedestrians where there are sidewalks. Okay. So we've got about 20 responses. Do others, is anybody still working on it, or do we want to?
Well, I think even if people are working on it, we can start hearing from people and I'll take some notes. So May, if you want to escape the full presenter screen mode, people will be able to see what notes I'm typing in. Just, neighbors can't reach Middle Harbor Shoreline Park. Great. Oops. And Randolph, if you want to share, I guess we can close it and share. You can tell us some of the things you've heard in the.
Yeah, we just got a couple of more in, so just want to make sure
Oh,
nobody's
good. Awesome.
typing right now. All right, 10 seconds. Put a period on it. All right, done. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you for these responses. We really appreciate hearing some of people's experiences in this area. Okay, should I keep moving?
I think we were going to let a few people share and Randolph was going to read off some of the things in the poll.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
So please raise your hand if you would like to share, or I can just pick some random. So I think think about the cross between Emeryville and it being empty. It could be beautiful. Concerns are lots of potholes, people driving over 50 miles an hour, no walkable streets. Again, there are no safe walkways. People drive fast, very wide trucks idle in the median. I've seen that many times, a whole line of trucks in the median. Some trees near many new homes. So the trees are near the new homes. It's concrete, cold and not inviting. I could envision a pathway filled with trees, but cutting concrete to make also running paths, dog walks, drawing families for playful walks. I've driven by there, but not frequently. I don't know, housing was facing the highway without much of a buffer, concerned whether air filtration was a part of that housing design. Let's get a couple of more in there. We've got a resident at 13th and Wood, just a few blocks off of frontage, and uses the road almost every day. Often see trucks idling and people dumping. Would love to see more greens and traffic calming measures. And a few more. Let's see here. Busy, lots of trucks. Think of it as Scott thinks it's a buffer. He thinks of it as a buffer from the freeway, mainly just to get from 7th Street to West Grand. There's a lot of fast moving and loud car and truck traffic. One of my friends lives in the new developments, and I've used the frontage roads a few times. So trucks, noise, pollution is what we're hearing. Anybody want to share their thoughts? Come off mute and share their thoughts. Here's a couple more in the chat.
I'll share my thoughts.
Yeah,
This is Tamara. I live in Prescott at 8th and Center. For me, frontage road is an access between when I'm coming off the Bay Bridge or 880. It is the quickest way to get to my house at 8th and Center near the BART station. So it's an access road for me because there are no stoplights on it, and I could just zip right down to 7th and frontage and, go right on into Prescott. So that's what it is for me. Thanks.
Yeah, and rails, Beth says it's, she's pointing to the rail station, the 16th Street train station, has major history in terms of the Pullman Porters and the impact on Oakland. We'd love to see that uplifted. So that's right on the backside of the train station, is right on Frontage Road. Other thoughts? Christopher?
Yeah, I think I would like to speak out for Daniel Burns. I don't think he's on this call, but I don't think people realize how much volunteer time he does spreading wood chip, graffiti, removing graffiti, all along Frontage Road. And if you would drive down there, you would think that that was something Public Works was doing, or City of Oakland, and it's actually him. He gets volunteers, and sometimes he's out there 10 hours a day, just cleaning up trash, cutting down weeds and putting mulch down that he gets from the city. So I just wanted to acknowledge him, that he's done a lot of great work. And I don't think that a lot of people know in this community. That's why Frontage looks so clean these days.
That's awesome.
They need to have me and you sign all the documents again.
Uh-oh. All right, any other, oh, Laura.
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is great, a great discussion here. In fact, it's wonderful to see everybody provide their comments, and thank you for the organization of this. And I say that in addition to not only really seeing community working together, but also from the fact that I would say in this discussion, our silent partners, which we are happy to take in this planning discussion, our city and the Port of Oakland, specifically regarding the Frontage Road. And I say this as part of like backdrop to contemplate down the road and what have you, not to intervene in this process, but that the city and the port have an agreement, and it's related to the implementation of the West Oakland Truck Management Plan, and it was done in an agreement in accordance, I think around 2022, 2023. I could be mistaken, but that this agreement is also posted online, and I will try to find the link so we can all have it and for more background. But essentially, it's an agreement to address Frontage Road, so that the Frontage Road can actually be a space where both trucks and vehicles can coexist in a safe manner. So I'll leave it as that.
Great, thanks, Laura. And Christopher, is there a way for us to contact Daniel Burns? We'll try and catch up with Daniel. Is Christopher still on?
Nicole says she has his info. So Brent, you can get his info from Nicole.
Great. Any additional final comments on your thoughts about?
I think we're good. This is we'll save the list and add it to this notes page so you can see what everyone else wrote.
Great. And I've captured your comments here in the notes. All right. Take it away, May.
Thank you. Thanks everyone so much. I really appreciate all the participation. This is great. Awesome. Okay, so next I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about how we're doing a lot of our initial analysis and modeling for this project. So for this project, we're using something called evidence-based design. which means we are using scientific research to try to design our physical environment. So evidence-based design is a cycle. So first we use analysis to figure out where pollution is. Then we design an intervention, then we implement or build the design. Finally, we monitor the results, and we can use that to learn to improve the analysis and designs of our next project. So evidence-based design doesn't only apply to air pollution. You can use this framework to test a lot of different types of design improvements. And we do this because we always want to be improving the things that we're building. So a tool that we use to design our projects better is modeling. And this is because we can use models to compare designs before we build them, which can save a lot of time and resources. So what is modeling? Before we begin, here's just a few key points of the things we're going to be talking about. A model uses inputs to make predictions. Models aren't always accurate, but they are still useful. We are working on trying to make the inputs that we use more accurate so we can try to get more accurate results. And we're developing models that can test the differences between planting interventions. So a model is a mathematical way of predicting things, given a set of inputs from the world. So the type of modeling most people are familiar with is weather predictions. When they predict the weather, they look at a bunch of different inputs like incoming solar radiation, condensation, topography, evaporation, just to name a few. And they use that to create predictions that are useful for us. But weather predictions aren't always right, are they? And that's something really important to emphasize. The modeling that we're trying to do is a lot like predicting the weather. The information you get is a useful tool, but we have to keep in mind that modeling an outcome isn't the same as measuring that outcome. So modeling can't replace measuring, but it can do things that measuring can't. So the thing models allow us to do is compare options before using a lot of resources to build the full-size version. So one of the reasons the Wright brothers, for example, were able to successfully build the first airplane was that they actually developed different ways to test smaller versions of wing shapes instead of just trying to build a bunch of full-size versions. So that's actually one of their huge innovations with modeling. So we know generally where we want to have the interventions, the areas with higher pollution exposure. And we want to design something to block that pollution and then test to see if it would be effective before we build it. So to do that, we need to build a model of the physical environment, input the pollution sources and the levels of pollution, figure out how that pollution is going to move through the physical environment. And then once we have that, we can change variables to see how it will affect the movement of pollution. So in this case, we are testing different tree buffer designs and then comparing which one will work the best. So first, we built a digital model of the Prescott neighborhood. So we use LiDAR to scan the neighborhood, which gives us a 3D map of the urban environment. And there's a lot of different objects that we want to pick up, like buildings, the West Oakland BART track, bridges, trees, things like that. So here's how we do LiDAR scans. We use a scanner that can be mounted on a car or a backpack, and then we scan the places that we're interested in. So people can also do LiDAR scans from planes, and we can use that data too. It's basically firing lasers in all of these different directions, and then based on when the laser returns to the scanner, it creates a three-dimensional point cloud. And then we can take those scans that we've created and create a simplified version of everything for our model. So here you can see a tree that has become a Lego version of itself. And we do that because even when it's simplified, these things are still very computationally intensive. So once we run a model, it will typically take 16 days of a computer running constantly for us to get the results from that model. So here's that same tree again, next to its Lego counterpart, just for context. And so then we need to figure out what the pollution sources are and how much the pollution is coming from those sources. So this is a lot more complicated than the 3D model. So when making a model or really doing any project, it's always really important to look at the work other people have been doing first. we knew that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District had already built a really, really good model. So here is their prediction of where pollution from local sources would disperse across West Oakland. And in their model, they had a whole team of people that did a giant inventory of all these different sources of pollution. And they made sure that the numbers they used for those sources were really well vetted. And this is really important because if the pollution level that you are inputting into your model isn't accurate, then your output probably isn't going to be very accurate either, which would be bad. So if the air district models are so good, why can't we just use those? Well, for a few reasons. One, the scale of the model is very different from the scale that we want to work at. So they're looking at how pollution moves across a city, and that information is really great for identifying problem areas, but we also want to zoom in and look at things that are happening at the city block level. So why does the scale of a model matter? Well, a larger scale model might tell you the general direction of the wind, for example, which is really useful to know. But if you zoomed in to the scale of the neighborhood, there are going to be areas behind buildings where the wind is blocked. And so that larger model isn't necessarily going to capture that. Another big reason is that the air district model doesn't include vegetation. And we are specifically trying to look at how vegetation is going to intercept pollution. So our goal is to make our own models, which operate on a smaller scale and include vegetation. But we still want our model to use information from the air district's larger model. You can imagine if you want to map how air moved through the buildings in your neighborhood, understanding the general direction of the wind would still be really important, even though you're interested in more detail. So we're trying to use as much of the information that the air district has provided about pollution levels as we can, while also trying to make some of our own estimates where we have gaps in information. And so this is an evolving process that we are going to be continuing to refine throughout this project. So after we figure out the pollution levels we want to model, we input information about the general wind direction. So in this part of Oakland, wind tends to move from the west to the east. So in this picture, you can see a north arrow in the lower right corner. So the wind is moving generally from the lower left of this picture to the upper right. So you may have noticed that many of the designs that we've shown so far include trees. And that is because we are particularly interested in how trees can be used to impact air quality. And this is the variable that we're going to test in our models. So we already know that trees have some effect on people's respiratory health. For example, there was a study done on what happened when an invasive bug killed trees here in the US. The emerald ash borer is a little bug originally from Asia, and its larvae bore into ash trees, which kills them. So since it was first detected in the US in 2002, it has killed tens of millions of ash trees. And researchers found that in counties where more of the ash trees had been killed, there have been more cardiovascular related deaths. So in the 15 states they studied this, the borer was associated with more than 20,000 additional deaths. So we know that vegetation has an effect in general. But what we want to do is plant specific trees in specific ways in order to most effectively stop pollution. So we are designing vegetative buffers, which are basically like these thick walls of trees. So the EPA has published several papers about what makes the most effective vegetative buffer design. A lot of these things are pretty intuitive. The buffer needs to be long so that the pollution doesn't just blow around it. It should be at least 4 meters high, which is about 13 feet, so that it doesn't just blow over it. And it needs to not have a bunch of gaps in it because the pollution just blows through the gaps. And it should also be pretty thick in order to be effective. There's also differences between the types of trees that we want to use. We like evergreen trees because they don't lose their leaves, so they can capture pollution year round. And when the tree is shaped like a Christmas tree and it's very thick and dense with lots of little needles, it actually has more overall surface area than when a tree has flat leaves. And so there's a lot more spots for those pollution particles to get stuck on. So we actually measured the surface area of leaves of a bunch of different tree species so that we could input that information into our model and better estimate how the pollution would interact with them. And we had to make sure that the model was treating trees like trees instead of a wall, which is actually less effective at blocking pollution. Data has also shown that the closer to the source of pollution your buffer is, the more effective it is. So it's kind of like if you were standing close to a sprinkler, you're going to block more of the water than if you were standing further away from it, if that makes sense. So a few key points about vegetative buffers is having a buffer that is tall and thick is more effective. Using evergreen trees with dense leaves is better for blocking more pollution. And it's better to plant buffers close to the source of pollution. So here's what one of our models for the Prescott project looks like. To the left is the existing conditions, and the right is some proposed options that we want to study. And here's what that same model looks like in 3D. On top, we have the trees that already exist. And on the bottom, there's an example of adding a lot of vegetative buffers to our areas of interest. And you can see the various zones that we were talking about before. So in order to have a design to put in the models to start making comparisons, we have created a few initial planting concepts to test out. And so in the next section, I'm going to be showing you some of these initial concepts. We're still in the very early stage of this process, so we really want to hear people's thoughts on of the things they'd like to see designed, because we can try modeling those ideas too. So to reiterate, here are some of those key takeaways to remember about modeling. A model uses inputs to make predictions. Models aren't always accurate, but they're still useful. We are working on trying to make the inputs that we use more accurate so we can try to get much more accurate results. And we are developing models that can test the differences between different planting interventions. And so now, does anyone have any clarifications or questions about modeling?
And you can just raise your hand, or you can also just put comments in the chat. Any questions? Great. Onward.
Awesome. Okay, let's see. Next, we are going to get a little bit more detailed about some of the ideas that we have for the project area. So in this map, you can see the dark red dots represent the high levels of black carbon being detected along the 880 freeway and the frontage road. So black carbon is an air pollutant emitted from gas and diesel engines, coal-fired power plants, and other sources that burn fossil fuels. And if you'll remember, we want to get our buffers as close to those sources of pollution as we can. So our goal is to intercept the pollution that's coming off of the road before it reaches the Prescott neighborhood. So we want to block the freeway pollution right near the freeway, and we want to get that pollution that's coming off of frontage road right on frontage road. So I'm going to show you what we've been thinking about for these different areas. All of these have different kind of timelines and challenges. As I said before, Caltrans and 7th Street areas will be talked about in more depth in a later session. So definitely get in touch with us if you want to be included in those design sessions. The immediately plantable area is a relatively simple design concept, so I'm not going to be spending a ton of time on it. We mostly want to fill it with trees wherever we can. It can also be planted much sooner because we wouldn't need to do any concrete removal or major infrastructure changes in order to add trees. I'm going to be spending a little bit more time digging into the road diet because we have we're much more excited to design this part with the community. We think that if people are excited about doing a more ambitious project that pushes the envelope on what's typically done for green infrastructure projects, then there may be opportunities to make that happen. And so this would probably take much longer to design than these other sections and may require us to go and get additional funding. All right, so first, let's start with that immediately plantable area along frontage. As I said before, in this area, we just want to fill in buffers where we can. So in some cases, this will mean replacing, repairing, or bringing in new irrigation. And we want to bring in more trees to replace trees that have died. This is also probably the easiest place for us to employ local tree planting groups to plant and maintain the trees, because it's not along the freeway and it won't require special equipment. And so in order to plant here, yeah, you don't have to do concrete removal. So it's just a little bit more simple. So what if we want to add even more trees and buffers though? So we can have as many barriers between the pollution coming off of the road and people's lungs as we can. Well, there literally isn't any more places to plant trees near the road. So what do? That's where our 7th Street and frontage road designs come in. So what we want to do is add more places to plant trees. So let's talk about what adding trees to frontage road might look like. So a really important piece when it comes to thinking about air quality on frontage road is that this is a road that has a lot of truck traffic. In 2008, a health risk assessment by CARB found that West Oakland residents are exposed to diesel pollution at concentrations that are almost 3 times higher than the average levels in the Bay Area. And 71% of air pollution risk was attributable to truck traffic. So the city of Oakland does want to limit some of the impacts of trucking on residents. And so they decided to create a new truck plan, which gets the trucks out of the neighborhoods. In this new truck plan, you can see the red lines are the areas that are now prohibited for trucks. And this is a really good thing because getting off trucks off of the residential streets is critical. The blue line shows that the new truck route is being planned along Frontage Road, which borders the Prescott neighborhood. And so that does mean that the trucks are going to be concentrated along this road. So there's a lot of people in the community who are pushing back against this plan. It may be that the community is not going to be able to get the city to send trucks elsewhere. And so what we want to do is to just design something that will mitigate some of the diesel pollution that will otherwise start to hit the neighborhood. And so along Frontage Road, we're proposing a road diet to increase safety and plantable space. So what is a road diet? Road diets are reducing the number of lanes and the lane sizes in order to slow cars down and get people to pay attention. So technically the speed limit on Frontage Road is 35 miles per hour, but having driven on that road, I'm pretty sure no one actually goes 35. It seems like people are going like 50 miles an hour. And there are definitely accidents there as a result. So just like 7th Street, there's this huge middle lane that we could be utilizing. Frontage also has these very large shoulders on either side and these really large lanes. So there's definitely space that could be utilized. So we're proposing a road diet for the entire part of Frontage Road, but I'm going to zoom in and show you a cross section of this area that the red arrow is pointing to, so we can talk about what some of our different design options look like. All right, so here's some of the options that we want to get feedback on. All of these options rely on reducing the lane sizes a little bit and taking up that middle lane and some of the shoulder. So I also want to emphasize that at this stage of the process, there's a lot of possibilities. So think about this as like a jumping off point for discussion. So option 1 is a little more reserved. We have these 3-foot planters on either side near the walls. And then after the road leaves the 7th Street Canyon, those side buffers can actually just be absorbed into the middle planters. There are still 2 lanes going in each direction, even though they're now 11 feet wide instead of 13 feet wide. And there's a planter running alongside a multi-use path, which increases safety. There's also a planter in the middle of the road to really get planters right up against the pollution sources. And both of the planters are 7.5 feet wide. In option 2, we've reduced the lanes to going 1 in each direction. And with the option of the planter shrinking down a little and allowing for a second turn lane when we need a turn lane, the median planter and the multi-use buffer plant path buffer planter both have been increased to being 10 to 14 feet wide. And the benefit of this would be that reducing the area down to one lane would mean that the cars would likely naturally slow down, as the area would feel a lot less, much less like a highway. And then option 3, instead of having a median buffer, we've shifted all of the planting to the right. So the cool thing about this is that it gives a lot more plantable space. So we can use a lot of really big trees, and bigger and taller trees are likely going to do a better job at creating a barrier to pollution. In this option, we've opted to show a smaller path instead of a multi-use path. That's something we definitely like feedback on, because in this version, you wouldn't really get to have bikes along frontage as much. You know, this is something where if people wanted a smaller path along any of the other options, that's also okay. We're just showing different options here. In this version of option 3, I'm also showing it reducing it to being one lane going in each direction. But really, we could also have 2 lanes going in each direction and still decide that we want all our buffer space to be to the right instead of having medians like in options 1 and 2. So there's a lot of design features here that we'd like to get people's opinions on, and we'll have feedback. You can give feedback on that during our discussion. But basically, it's like lanes. Do we want 1? Do we want 2 going in each direction? For the planters, do we like the medians, or do we like having one big planter? For the path, do we like to have a multi-use path or a very small path? And do people like the idea of having dedicated turn lanes in situations where there is only one lane, or when there's 2 lanes? So we mentioned before that this area where frontage meets 7th Street dips down, and it creates a lower section of the street. So because this dip causes flooding to happen, we do also want to engineer something that slows and captures water. And so in the area where the topography dips down, we would like the planters to double as water collection areas. So the cool thing is that trees would be able to have multiple benefits at once. They would be protecting pedestrians that are on mixed use or single paths. They would also be dampening the sound of cars, and they would be absorbing water. And so as the street descends, the water could collect in these like stepped bioswales, which would slow it down and keep it from flooding the lower areas. And then there could be an area at the bottom where the water could collect below the street and be saved for irrigation and get pumped out when it gets too full. And so here is kind of what some of that greening from above might look like. And you can see in this diagram, a portion of the planting areas, which is where the street is sloping down, we would like to double as bioswales. So right now we're in the stage where we are modeling the differences between including or not including entire areas of the design. And we're doing this because we want to see at a high level which areas are going to be the most cost effective for us to design further. So simulation A has both Caltrans and the immediately plantable area in it. And we're comparing that to simulation B, which has Caltrans and the road diet on frontage and 7th. So our initial models are showing an 11% improvement in air quality in the neighborhood when we have plantings along the freeway on option 1. Or actually, sorry, let me go a little bit more into this first. Here's what these look like in model form. You can see, oops, sorry, there it is. You may notice that in simulation B, we are testing the first option of the road diet, which has the smallest of median plantings. And so here are some of the results from simulation A. The blue areas show us where there is less pollution concentration than when we ran the model with existing conditions, which means the air pollution concentration improved. And the darker areas show more pollution concentration. So one of the things we're seeing in our preliminary models is that having the trees along the freeway blocks pollution from moving as freely towards the Prescott neighborhood. And we think some of that is being deposited on the trees, but it's also trapping the pollution near the freeway. So because no one lives literally in the middle of the freeway lane, this actually probably isn't a bad thing. People in their cars are usually driving with their windows up on the freeway. And even if they weren't, passing through an area with high pollution isn't the same risk as living in that pollution every day. And so here's that area from the side. So the purple line is showing where we've taken this side view from. So from the side, you can see the pollution concentrating, kind of pluming at the freeway, but the neighborhood is 15% better. So as you move away from the buffer, you experience less of that positive effect. So I think the main takeaway from this is that our models are showing that blocking pollution from moving somewhere does mean that it can collect in the areas where you're blocking it. So here is simulation B. This one shows the frontage road diet and Caltrans together. Because the smaller buffers are relatively short and in a canyon, we aren't seeing as much improvement as when we had the immediately plantable buffers that are actually kind of on top of that wall. So it appears as though frontage road diet causes the pollution to collect in the canyon more, and the area where the road dips down. And that could be good in some ways, because maybe we can keep that from getting to the neighborhood, but it may mean that it's not as good of an idea to encourage pedestrians in that area if we chose this specific way of arranging the plants. And so here we're seeing an 11% improvement in concentration instead of a 15% improvement like in simulation A. And so here are those two models compared. So these are very preliminary models. There are still a lot more things we want to test. We want to see what it would look like to remove the Caltrans buffer altogether, to see what would happen. We also want to see what it would look like if we use option 3 of the road diet, which had that super thick buffer all the way to the right, because it's thicker and taller, so we could potentially see a much better removal in that scenario. I also want to emphasize that these results are, they're preliminary. In studies where they've built vegetative buffers and actually monitored the results, they've seen improvements that range from 15 to 20 to even 60% of an improvement in air quality behind the buffer. So usually one of the biggest factors is the quality of the buffer. So I think there is a big argument to be made to have the biggest buffer that we can. So I think that this brings in some questions. So if we know that a buffer concentrates pollution upwind of it, how do you best design these buffers? Does it make sense to potentially cause spikes at frontage road where pedestrians might be, if it might make the neighborhood better? And what are some of the other scenarios we should and shouldn't test? So those are some things to think about. And finally, air quality isn't the only thing that matters when it comes to what a community can be. Ideally, in 15 to 20 years, there's going to be a lot more electric cars and way less pollution. There's probably going to still be brake dust and things that we'll have to worry about, but we do want to think about the other things that this road could also be improving. So we want to hear about what's important to people, because that could be incorporated into how the space gets designed. So do people want to improve the ecological health of the place and provide habitat for birds and squirrels and stuff? And if that's people's top priority, do they want us to be building super cool bird houses and the best bird baths ever? Or how about making sure that we take care of the stormwater and clean it before it gets into the ocean? Do people want a super beautiful tree-lined walkway? And do people want more safe walking and biking space? Or would people rather people not be walking there at all? We're going to have a discussion about this in a moment. And I want to emphasize that it's okay for people to want a road to be doing all of these different things at once. So if you think all of this is equally important, do let us know. All right, and so now we are going to move into the discussion section of the presentation. And so first we want to do a Q&A as a group first to see if people have some questions about the design and any additional information they want to know before we go into the breakout rooms. And then we're going to have various questions that we're going to be asking in the breakout rooms. So yeah, are there any questions about the designs first?
And May, if you go to the next slide and get it out of presenter mode, I already took questions. If you take it out of presenter mode, yeah. Those are all the questions that so far have come through in the chat. Sub bullets are ones where there was answers. So there was 2 here that haven't been answered yet. So this top one about having a wider planting area, and then that last one, and then I think we can go on to the hands that are up.
Okay, sure. So the first question is about if there's a wider planting area, does that mean the roots are less likely to have an impact on the pavement around them? Or do the trees we're considering tend to have deep rather than wide/shallow roots? And that's a great question. You know, we generally do try to design with trees that have less problematic roots. But it is absolutely true that having a wider planting area does mean that typically the tree roots are not going to interrupt the sidewalk as much. A lot of the reasons that tree roots tend to mess up sidewalks, I mean, broadly is because they're being put into these tiny little tree wells, and their roots need to get air, and they end up having to move the sidewalk to get to it. And so the next question was, is the traffic buildup a factor in the modeling, especially if there's a concentration of trucks on this road? Why make the road smaller? This is also a major artery getting to the Bay Bridge. Just curious if you're studying traffic flow in order to determine how a road diet may affect that. Yeah, so that's a great question. So yes, we are looking at traffic flow and counts. That's not something that we included in these preliminary models that we showed you today, but it is something that we're thinking about. And I think that that brings up a lot of really important thoughts when it comes to designing a road diet or traffic interventions in general. So like, for example, you know, we could put a stoplight along the road in order to try to make it safer. But that would, because that would slow people down. We tend to see spikes in pollution where cars are idling. And so that would probably create a plume of pollution right at the traffic light. So that's something we'd want to consider. I think that when it comes to the question of if there's a concentration of trucks on the road, why make the road smaller? It's more the thought of like slowing cars down for safety. When it comes to the trucks, we are hoping that having a really thick buffer near the trucks to try to intercept the pollution will do a better job than not having a buffer at all. So that's kind of, I think, our hypothesis in putting together this road diet. Let's see.
I think just the last one on here hasn't
Okay.
yet. And then I have another page on the next slide of some questions. And there's many hands going up. So this is great. I'm so happy people have questions.
Is the last question this one about a better maintenance or larger planting areas? Let's see.
Excuse me, my hand is up to be in the queue.
Yeah, we see, Miss Margaret, there were questions asked before you that were in the chat.
Sorry, Beth, just clarifying question. Which was the other
Oh,
question?
sorry, that's a duplicate question. Just seeing if you're paying. Okay, the next slide has the other questions, and then Shayna and Miss Margaret have their hand up.
Okay. Why are all the designs on the same level? Would it ever make sense for the biking/pedestrian path to be higher up rather than at street level? That's an interesting question. I think that's not something that we've had thought a lot about. And so I think we'd have to look into what that option would look like. But yeah, that's a great question and a good design suggestion, something to look into.
Okay, so now we're on to well, Randolph, do you want to field this using our protocol? I think we
Yeah.
look for steering committee members first.
Yes, Miss Margaret said we're going to take the public before the co-leads, but we got you covered. All right, Shayna.
Okay, so my question was actually something that was alluded to briefly about the transition to electric vehicles. We know that in, let's say, 15 years' time, there are going to be a lot of electric vehicles on the road. Obviously, we need to protect people's health now, yesterday. I'm thinking, though, about the rate at which plants and trees that are planted are going to grow. And so I guess the simplest version of my question is, how long will it take for a vegetated buffer to grow to the point that it is significantly blocking pollution and actually making a difference in people's health?
Yeah, that's a good question. So firstly, one thing is, studying things like how smaller shrubs and grasses isn't something that has as much data behind it when it comes to actually monitoring the effect. But some studies have shown an impact on even using smaller vegetation, like that vegetation does a pretty good job at blocking pollution. As I said before in that other slide, it does a way better job if it's bigger. So I think that, you'll start to see some amount of effect, hopefully right away. One option that we employed in the past, we did a project in Kentucky in which we were trying to study this exact thing. And so the idea was to plant 8,000 trees in a low-income neighborhood and study the air quality or how that affected the respiratory health of the residents for 5 years after. And so obviously, if you're only doing a 5-year study, you can't wait for the trees to grow. So we actually paid for the trees to be planted, already at 12 to 15 feet. So that's something that we would, I think, need to think about with a cost benefit analysis. I mean, for one thing, a lot of grants, if we're using grant money, especially in California, typically don't let you plant trees that are over 15 gallons. And so that's something that we would want to weigh. It's a lot more expensive to plant larger trees. It's usually $100 for a 15-gallon tree, and it's $1,000 to $2,000 for a 12, 15, larger trees. So yeah, that is something that we also have to think about when putting together this project. I think that, a quote that Brian actually said to me the other day or said to the group the other day that stuck with me was this idea of old men plant acorns for trees that they'll never sit under. And so it's this question of a lot of the decisions that are going to be made today about how we design this project, it is possible that if we decide to plant smaller trees, that a lot of people are not necessarily going to feel the effects of that right away. And so it's how do we decide what to prioritize? And it makes sense if people want to prioritize things that will happen sooner and will affect them sooner. As far as the question of electric vehicles, I do hope that electric vehicles are making up a majority of the fleet in 10 to 15 years, but it's hard to know. And there are also other pollutants that can affect people, like brake dust and things like that. So yeah, sorry, that was a very long answer, but I hope that at least partially answered some of that question. Sorry, what can someone help me with calling the next person or directing me to which next question I should answer?
So we do a time check. Do we want to launch the poll as well? When does that come?
Yes. Why don't we launch the poll while we're still answering Q&A? And maybe go to the next slide May, and then we'll go back to the slide when we hear from Miss Margaret.
Hold up. I was next to the queue.
Yeah. We are. We got you. We're doing all of the above, but let me just tell you about this poll. We just added one additional, so don't mind the order, but you get 3. All right. I know it will let you do more than 3, but please only select 3.
We added maintenance thanks to Kalia's smart
Yeah.
comment.
Thank you, Leah. Miss Margaret?
Okay. One of the missing discussion is why that we cannot do city policy having full-grown trees be planted. That's a discussion item through the city.
Wait, say that again. I want to make sure I document what you asked.
Could you
Why do you have immature trees instead of full-grown trees be planted?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like if it were the
Stop.
I'm sorry.
Let me finish my question or my statement. Because it needs to be heard, it needs to be addressed from the city staff. I'm trying to help you here, May. Let me help you here. What make it so that the city gets to say the size of a tree to be put in an impacted community, impacted vulnerable community? That's number one. That needs to be researched. I don't need to have an answer for the city staff right now, but it needs to be researched. Why they would want to plant immature trees that reduce emissions. Second, what is the maintenance of those trees? And that's not for you to answer, May. That's also for the city to answer.
So are we holding those and then we're going to get that answer and then bring it back?
You're the facilitator.
Yeah, I don't know if we have that answer right now. So we're going to note that.
You got the city staff stand for sustainability sitting right here. And you got the other city staff sitting right here that need to have some voice into what I'm just saying.
Yeah, so noted. So for our city staff, can you can you tell us whether or not that answer is to be had right now, or is that something that you're going to have to research and get back?
Kalila said she would have to take that question to Public Works. Okay, I will mark that down. Thank you, Kalila.
Dana, you don't have nothing to say about that?
I also don't have information about this. I mean, where my mind has been going for this, Miss Margaret, is how do we get more funding for this project so that we can plant, as robustly as possible, as close to, what HIFI is saying needs to happen as possible. And as large of trees as possible to get things, to make sure that this is reaching its full potential for pollution mitigation and health impact as quickly as it can. And one of the things that I was thinking of, and it's interesting that this came up in the poll just now, was one of the options there was, I think, flooding and stormwater mitigation. And I was thinking about the city's national pollutant discharge, whatever it is, NPDS. I can never remember what it stands for, but the regulation that says that a jurisdiction with coastline has to keep its litter and pollution that's flowing into the bay below a certain amount, or else the city is fined. And we're always dancing around that limit. And I'm wondering if we could kind of marry the objectives here and get funding for the project if we're able to say this is going to have a really powerful impact on mitigating stormwater and mitigating debris and pollutants from getting into the bay. It seems like that would be another way to, to bring in additional funding in order to, get what you all are prioritizing for the project. I'm not sure if that, answers your question, because I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
It doesn't answer my question. All right. Okay, to add on to that, it's been my experience for the streetscape project for 7th Street. A bunch of immature trees were planted. Somebody was able to pull them up. So we have mature trees, and the planning process that you just can't come back into the neighborhood and pull a tree out. Also, having the city to understand, if you have mature trees.
Oh, I think Miss Margaret froze. Miss Margaret, you froze. And now we can't hear you.
But I do see Albertia's hand up.
Go for it. Yeah, we cannot hear you. So we're gonna take Miss Albertia.
Thank you, guys. When you're ready, Miss Margaret. Okay, you're freezing.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Miss Alberti.
Okay, one of the things that I was thinking about the trees and its sizes, I don't know if you guys had considered maybe a wall or something, and you could have different levels along that wall, and you could just stack the trees at different levels to help with that height until they start growing, and then you could just rotate them down and around as needed. But I was just thinking of that as a simple approach to the height of the trees, since you can't necessarily have the mature trees, maybe, I don't know. Maybe that will be an option. But also on your pole, you put on there other, but you didn't give a space to write anything in. And so I want to just say it so it can go onto the script here. Consider ADA accessibility to the bike lane and walkway, please. Thank you.
Great. Miss Margaret,
That's it.
we're gonna end the poll, and Miss Margaret, are you back? And then we're gonna kind of move on. Miss, do you have a couple? You're on mute. Do you have a couple? You want to finish your thought? Okay. So we're gonna end the poll. All right. And share the results. So the results, 97%. 90. Is somebody on not on mute? 97% of 28 out of 29 respondents said air pollution reduction. Next, at 45%, we have ecological benefits, habitat and biodiversity, and coming in, we'll do third and fourth. Third is safe pedestrian biking access, and fourth at 38% is road safety, reducing collisions. Well, I guess this is good. Where we don't. Whenever you talk about money, it kind of spoils the conversation. So cost came in last. So we're not thinking about cost right now. Another thing that was low on the totem pole was vehicle traffic efficiency at 7% and aesthetics at 10%. Noise reduction was the kind of the last one, like kind of right in the middle at 17%. Any,
That's really interesting. Thank you.
yeah.
Should we go into the breakout room?
Yes. Do you want to explain, May, if you go to the breakout activity slide, do you want to explain them?
Yeah. So we have two breakout activities. Let's see. Activity one was to share some thoughts about the priorities from the Zoom poll, and then activity two was basically a design review. So we would love to know people's initial reaction to the designs, how they would like to see the road in the future. I think those are the two most important questions we really like to go to get to. And then we were also curious about how we should weigh any conflicts in the community preferences versus research results, and also how we should involve WOCAP in the larger West Oakland community and the overall design, and get people's ideas on that. And so what we're going to do is break into breakout rooms, and we're going to have a facilitator in each breakout room and someone taking notes.